For decades, the number 100,000 wasn't just a salary. It was a destination. In the cultural imagination of the late 20th century, crossing the six-figure threshold was the finish line of the American dream. It promised more than just solvency. It promised excess. It meant a detached home in a good school district, two cars in the driveway, an annual vacation to Europe, and a robust investment portfolio that grew quietly in the background. If you made six figures, you had made it. You were the success story. You were safe. But in 2025, that number has become a mirage. For the millennial generation, the first cohort to fully enter their prime earning years during the post-pandemic economic recalibration, a $100,000 salary is no longer a ticket to the upper middle class. In major metropolitan hubs where the majority of these high-paying jobs are concentrated, it is barely a survival mechanism. We are witnessing the rise of a paradoxical demographic, the high-earning poor. These are individuals whose pay stubs suggest wealth, but whose bank accounts scream poverty. They are the Henry high earners, not rich yet, and they are drowning in a way that previous generations find mathematically impossible to comprehend. To understand this phenomenon, we have to strip away the nostalgia and look at the raw, brutal arithmetic of modern existence. Let's take a standard millennial professional living in a city like New York, San Francisco, or even secondary hubs like Austin or Denver. On paper, $100,000 looks robust. But the moment that money touches the real world, it begins to evaporate with a speed that defies historical precedent. First, the taxman takes his cut. After federal, state, and local taxes plus FICA contributions, that $100K is immediately reduced to roughly $68,000 to $72,000 in take-home pay, depending on the jurisdiction. That's about $5,800 a month. This is the first shock to the system. The gross number is a vanity metric. The net number is the reality. And the reality is already shrinking. Then comes housing. The financial rule of thumb, preached by boomer parents in outdated financial literacy courses, states that you should spend no more than 30% of your gross income on rent. That would be $2,500 a month. In 2025, finding a decent, safe, one-bedroom apartment in a Tier 1 city for $2,500 is not just difficult. It is a competitive sport. But assuming our millennial manages this feat, that $5,800 monthly income is now down to $3,300. Now add the debt that was required to get the job that pays the $100K. The average millennial student loan debt sits between $30,000 and $40,000, but for those with advanced degrees, often a prerequisite for six-figure roles, that number can easily eclipse $100,000. A standard repayment plan eats another $600 to $800 a month. We are now down to $2,500. Next, the cost of simply existing. Groceries have undergone a permanent price correction. The inflation headlines may have cooled, but prices didn't go back down. They just stopped rising as fast. A modest food budget for one person, focusing on nutrition and not just calories, is easily $600. Utilities, internet, and a phone plan, non-negotiables for the modern worker, take another $300. Commuting costs or car payments, insurance, and gas shave off another $500. We are now hovering around $1,100 left for the entire month. This is where the avocado toast argument usually enters the discourse, a lazy critique that suggests millennials are broke because they lack discipline. But this completely ignores the structural costs that didn't exist 30 years ago. We haven't even factored in health insurance premiums deducted from paychecks, out-of-pocket medical costs, or the exorbitant price of childcare if this millennial dares to start a family. The average cost of daycare in the US is now rivaling college tuition. If our hypothetical high earner has one child, that remaining $1,100 is gone instantly. In fact, they are now in the red. This is the psychological violence of the current economy. You do everything right. You go to college, you get the degree, you climb the ladder, you negotiate the salary, and you finally hit that magical six-figure number, only to find that you are living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from financial ruin. The lifestyle that $100,000 buys today is roughly equivalent to what $58,000 bought in 2000. Yet the social expectations of what a professional life looks like haven't downgraded. You are expected to dress the part, network, and maintain the veneer of success, all while internalizing the shame of being unable to save for a down payment on a house that now costs 7 times your annual income. The narrative of lifestyle creep, the idea that people spend more as they earn more, is certainly a factor, but it is often used to gaslight a generation facing a cost of living crisis. When the cost of needs creeps up faster than wages, that isn't lifestyle creep. That is systemic erosion of purchasing power. Rent is not a luxury. Healthcare is not a luxury. Education is not a luxury. We are seeing a fracturing of the social contract. The promise was simple: work hard, earn a high salary, and you will own a piece of the pie. Instead, millennials are finding that the pie has been eaten, and they are being charged rent for the crumbs. This creates a unique form of dissonance. You walk into a modern office, surrounded by sleek glass and ergonomic chairs, doing important work, while secretly calculating if you can afford to fix your car's transmission this month. The data supports this bleak outlook. Savings rates among high-earning millennials have plummeted. Credit card debt is rising fastest among the $45,000 to $100,000 income bracket. This isn't a failure of personal responsibility. It is a failure of currency. The money is broken. This financial fragility is invisible to the older generations, who solidified their wealth in a different economic epoch. A boomer parent sees their child making $100K and asks, "Where is all the money going?" And this is just the symptom. The fact that a top-tier salary yields a bottom-tier financial security is the alarm bell. To find the architect of this trap, we cannot look at a single villain or a specific administration. Instead, we must look at a fundamental shift in the operating system of the global economy that began roughly 50 years ago. The erosion of the six-figure salary is not a glitch. It is the mathematical result of a deliberate transition from an economy based on production and wages to an economy based on financialization and assets. The first pillar of this system is the decoupling of productivity from pay. If you look at economic charts from 1948 to 1973, two lines move in perfect lockstep. But around the mid-1970s, a jagged scar appears in the data. Productivity continued to skyrocket, driven by technology and efficiency, but wages flatlined. The gap between those two lines represents trillions of dollars in value. This was not an accident of nature. It was a victory of policy. The rise of shareholder primacy, the doctrine that a corporation's only moral obligation is to maximize its stock price, fundamentally changed the nature of employment. In this new paradigm, an employee's salary became a liability to be minimized rather than an investment to be nurtured. The tax code reinforces this, taxing the sweat of your brow at a higher rate than the passive appreciation of a stock portfolio or a real estate holding. This brings us to the second and perhaps most devastating pillar, the financialization of housing. For previous generations, a home was primarily a place to live, a durable good that offered stability. Today, housing is a speculative financial instrument. It is the primary retirement vehicle for the baby boomer generation, which creates a perverse political incentive. For boomers to retire comfortably, their home values must continue to rise indefinitely. But for millennials to enter the market, home prices must fall to reasonable levels relative to wages. These two goals are mutually exclusive. The system has chosen the former. Through restrictive zoning laws, NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and the artificial scarcity of buildable land, the housing ladder has been pulled up. But it gets darker. We are now witnessing the institutionalization of the single-family home market. Private equity firms and massive corporate landlords have entered the chat, buying up starter homes by the thousands with all-cash offers that no individual family can compete with. They are turning a nation of homeowners into a nation of permanent renters. When a $100,000 earner competes against a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund for a bungalow in the suburbs, the outcome is predetermined. The high rent prices that devour your paycheck aren't just the market at work. They are the yield demanded by Wall Street investors. The third mechanism of this trap is the credential inflation complex. 30 years ago, a generic office job required a high school diploma and a firm handshake. Today, that same job requires a bachelor's degree, and the management role above it requires a master's. The job hasn't changed. The barrier to entry has. Universities, realizing they had access to an unlimited tap of federal loan money with zero accountability for student outcomes, raised tuition at a rate that outpaced inflation by nearly 170% since 1980. This is a wealth transfer mechanism. It transfers future labor value from young people to bloated administrative layers in higher education. When you graduate with $50,000 in debt, you are entering the workforce as an indentured servant to the Department of Education or a private servicer. This debt forces you to take the corporate job you hate, prevents you from taking entrepreneurial risks, and delays household formation. It is a control collar that keeps the workforce compliant and desperate. Finally, we must address the silent thief, monetary policy and asset inflation. Since the 2008 financial crisis, and accelerated by the pandemic stimulus of 2020, central banks have printed trillions of dollars to stabilize the economy. When you flood the system with new money, that money has to go somewhere. It didn't go into your paycheck. It went into assets. It pumped up the stock market and the real estate market. This caused the everything bubble. For those who already owned assets, mostly older generations, this was a bonanza. Their net worth doubled or tripled without them lifting a finger. But for those trying to buy into the market, Millennials and Gen Z, it was a catastrophe. The price of the assets they needed to acquire to build wealth ran away from them faster than they could save. The goalposts were moved not by yards but by miles. We are living in a form of neo-feudalism, where social mobility is calcifying. The primary predictor of a millennial's wealth accumulation is no longer their salary or their work ethic. It is the wealth of their parents. If you receive a down payment gift from the bank of mom and dad, you get on the property ladder. If you don't, you remain trapped in the rental cycle, paying off someone else's mortgage. The meritocracy is dying, replaced by a hereditary aristocracy of asset holders. The $100,000 lie is simply the smoke screen that hides this machinery. By maintaining the illusion that 6 figures is a lot of money, the system shifts the blame onto the individual. If you make $100K and you're broke, the logic goes, it must be your fault. You must be bad with money. This gaslighting protects the status quo. The system is working exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed for you. It was designed to extract value from your labor to prop up the asset prices of the past. And now that we have diagnosed the disease and mapped the anatomy of the trap, the only question remaining is, how do you survive in a rigged game without losing your mind? The answer begins with a funeral. Before we can talk about tactics or survival strategies, we must collectively mourn the death of the 20th century roadmap. The path laid out by our parents, go to school, get a good job, buy a house, retire at 65, is not just difficult. It is obsolete. The first step in this new defensive economics is the ruthless prioritization of geographic arbitrage. In a digitized economy, location is the single biggest lever for financial survival. If you earn $100,000 in New York or San Francisco, you are working class. If you earn $100,000 in Ohio, Portugal, or Vietnam, you are affluent. The system relies on you remaining in high-cost hubs to feed the rentier class, but the rise of remote work has cracked the prison door open. We are seeing the beginning of a great migration of competence, where millennials are voting with their U-Hauls, abandoning the coastal cities that abused them for secondary markets where the math still works. However, for those who cannot move, or for whom the office is a physical tether, the solution turns toward the structural reinvention of the household. We have to destigmatize the multi-generational home and the communal living model. The nuclear family, financially speaking, was a luxury of the mid-century economic boom. Throughout most of human history, living in larger, extended tribal units was the norm because it pooled resources and risk. The shame associated with living with parents or roommates in your 30s is a manufactured social construct designed to sell more real estate and appliances. Embracing communal living is not a regression. It is a rational market adaptation. It allows for the accumulation of capital in a hostile environment. We are likely moving toward a future where co-living isn't just a trend for 20-somethings, but a permanent housing strategy for the middle class. Beyond housing, we must fundamentally alter our relationship with labor. The quiet quitting phenomenon was not laziness. It was the workforce waking up to the poor return on investment of hustle culture. If working 60 hours a week instead of 40 yields no additional purchasing power and no loyalty from the employer, then doing the bare minimum is not slacking, it is efficient. The smart money is now divorcing identity from employment. The job is a utility, a means to fund the life, not the life itself. This emotional detachment protects you from the psychological violence of the corporate ladder. The goal shifts from climbing to sustaining. We must also confront the great wealth transfer with clear eyes. There is a popular narrative that millennials will eventually be saved when they inherit the boomers' trillions. This is a dangerous hope to cling to. While some will inherit vast fortunes, for the majority, that wealth will be consumed by the end-of-life care industry. The American healthcare system is designed to drain assets before Medicaid kicks. A nursing home can cost $10,000 to $15,000 a month. That inheritance isn't going to you. It's going to private equity firms that own the assisted living facilities. Relying on an inheritance is a strategy for disappointment. You must assume you are on your own. So what does the macro future look like? If the current trajectory holds, we are heading toward a bifurcated society, a small class of asset owners and a permanent service class of renters. However, markets are cyclical, even rigged ones. Demographics are destiny, and as the boomer generation exits the market, the sheer volume of real estate they hold will have to change hands. This could lead to a price correction, but likely not a crash, as institutional investors stand ready to buy the dip. The more likely scenario is a slow, grinding transition to a European-style existence for American millennials. High taxes, high social services eventually, smaller living spaces, fewer cars, and a focus on quality of life over quantity of possessions. We are entering a post-growth mindset. The metric of success will shift from accumulation to resilience. Can you survive a layoff? Do you have a skill tradable outside the corporate matrix? Do you have a community that supports you? This leads us to the Stoic adaptation. If the game is rigged, the only winning move is to change the rules of scoring. The consumer economy spends billions convincing you that you are miserable because you don't own the next thing. They weaponize your envy. The ultimate rebellion in late-stage capitalism is to refuse to be dissatisfied. It is finding contentment in the things that have resisted inflation: connection, creativity, nature, and physical health. This isn't a call to poverty. It's a call to autonomy. It is realizing that a $100,000 salary is just a number. Real wealth is the ability to say no. No to the overtime that ruins your health. No to the purchase that puts you in debt. No to the social pressure to perform a version of success that is killing you. The generation that was promised the moon and handed a bill is finally tearing up the contract. They are not failing the system. The system failed them, and now they are building something else in the ruins. It is a smaller life, perhaps. A quieter life. But it is a life that belongs to them, not the bank. The lie of the six-figure salary has been exposed. And once you see the lie, you are no longer bound by it. You are free to walk away from the table and start your own game.